It is April 8th, 2025, and Iran has confirmed plans for talks with the US coming up this weekend in Oman. Now, Iran is calling them indirect, noting the presence of a mediator. The US is referring to them as direct talks. I think we're all just kind of waiting to see what comes out of these discussions and what is the significance of these talks, especially as you have the US military building up its presence in the region, making it look as though they are preparing for an attack on Iran and for a possible war with Iran. You have Netanyahu in Trump's ear. And it's very significant that Netanyahu was sitting there next to Trump when Trump was announcing plans for these talks with Iran. And yet, even though the US intelligence community says that they do not believe that Iran is planning to create a nuclear weapon, that's still Trump's sole focus. So, what is going to come out of this, and what does it mean for the region as a whole as we continue to keep an eye on the suffering of the Palestinian people in Gaza and on US bombings in Yemen and on and on? Well, we got into all of the latest with a special guest earlier, so let's take a listen to that conversation now. Joining me now to discuss is Dimitri Lascaris, a Canadian journalist, activist, lawyer, and host of Reason to Resist. Dimitri, thanks so much for taking the time to join me.
Thank you, Rachel, and thank you for correctly pronouncing my name. You did a wonderful job.
As I was saying that, I was sitting there going, I do not know if I'm saying this, and I should have checked with you. So I'll take it. We'll see if I can get it again at the end of this. But I'm always glad to get to talk to you. And I know that there is a lot going on right now. We saw Trump was joined in the Oval Office by Netanyahu again, his second visit to DC in less than 3 months. And I thought it was interesting that that is when Trump decided that he was going to announce that there are plans for what he described as direct talks between the US and Iran coming up on Saturday. Now, the goal seems to be some sort of a nuclear deal, I guess, similar to the one that Trump pulled the US out of back in 2018. But as we have that happening, we've heard from Iran's foreign minister so far. He has confirmed that there are plans for talks, but has described them as indirect talks and said that Oman would be kind of the facilitator. So, how do you view the significance of this? Is it just semantics at this point when it comes to direct versus indirect? And how important are these talks that are going to be happening?
Well, as a class actions lawyer, I attended many mediations of high stakes class actions. And typically, what happens is you take one delegation, you put them in a conference room, you take another delegation, you put them in another conference room, and then there's somebody who's a mediator, mutually agreed upon, who shuttles back and forth between the two. Now, you could call those direct or you could call them indirect. I don't, because they're in the same place physically, but they're not actually talking directly to each other. So I think, frankly, this is semantics. It's kind of silly. It's a good thing they're talking to each other, but I think the real question, Rachel, is what is Trump going to demand? There's been a lot of chatter about the nuclear program of Iran. The United States just issued the Intelligence Committee a threat assessment for 2025, which says unequivocally that the intelligence community of the United States assesses that Iran is not seeking to develop a nuclear weapon. This is Donald Trump's own intelligence agency. So what is this all about, really? I think that what they're going to demand, in addition to the complete elimination of Iran's civilian nuclear program, and there's no obligation on Iran to give up civilian nuclear, energy, but they're going to demand also the destruction or the dismantlement of its conventional ballistic missiles, which Trump tried to get them to give up previously in his first administration. And I think they're also going to demand that they stop supporting the axis of resistance, Hezbollah, the Houthis, and so forth. I would be astonished if the Iranians are willing to talk about those things. If they stick by their guns, then I think these talks are going to fail very quickly. And hopefully we'll find out that Trump was bluffing. But I don't think he's bluffing. I think he's quite prepared to attack Iran if they don't accede to his demands, whatever they may be.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you bring that up because that's a major concern that I have when I'm looking at what the US is doing right now, right? What it's saying versus what it's doing, which seems to be the main thing is you've got the US sending a second aircraft carrier to the Middle East, sending additional defense systems to Israel. it seems like they're preparing for something more than just, going into these talks and making it look like, oh, they're ready to act if Iran does not agree to play ball with them. And we have kind of watched Trump. This is the way that he approaches negotiations, right? He did this, a version of this, I guess, with Russia, where he started out by, saying, oh, if they don't agree to a deal, then we're going to hit them with sanctions and tariffs and whatever. So he starts out like he's some hard negotiator. But yeah, as you were noting there, when it comes to the possibility of an attack, what are the concerns right now, especially when you have Netanyahu directly in Trump's ear?
Well, based on historical experience, we can, I think, fairly assume that Netanyahu is going to have a lot of sway. And there should be no doubt in anybody's mind that Netanyahu's regime wants the United States to attack Iran. He has been working towards that end for over 2 decades, Rachel. I mean, the man is absolutely hell bent, and he probably thinks he has no better opportunity than now to embroil the United States in a war on Iran. And during the Trump's first administration, he almost did provoke a war on Iran when they murdered Qasem Soleimani, the top general of Iran. The only reason why that didn't result in a full-blown war was because the Iranians had the good sense to notify the Americans which military bases they were going to strike, and no American soldiers died in the retaliatory attacks. But this time around, I don't think the Americans can count on that level of restraint. And in any event, what the first administration of Trump, I think, showed to us is that he is prepared to risk war, all-out war with Iran in order to, satisfy the demands of Netanyahu. Or I personally don't believe that that's primarily what's driving Trump. I think Trump simply wants his administration, his government, to have total control over the resources of West Asia. And they're using Israel as a tool to do that. That's how I view it.
Yeah, and it's interesting to watch how kind of quote unquote resource driven Trump is, right? He looks at Ukraine and he sees, okay, we're going to go for their rare earth minerals, or he looks at Syria and he sees the oil. Now, when it comes to the position that Iran is in, and I'm with you, I think that if, because I guess they're sending Steve Witkoff, Trump's Middle East envoy. So if Witkoff goes in and he's telling Iran, oh, you have to, stop any support for the axis of resistance, Iran is going to say that's a non-starter right there, right? If he brings up a number of different things, Iran's going to be like, we're not even going to continue these negotiations. So what kind of a position is Iran in right now, where they're watching Trump, they're watching the way that the Trump administration just handled the ceasefire deal in Gaza, where they were all for it initially, and then a few weeks into it, they go, oh, okay, we're not going to continue with that. We're not going to get past phase 1. And now Israel is right back to its bombardment and blockade of the Gaza Strip. So where does that leave Iran, and how do you think that they're looking at this situation?
You raise, very important points, Rachel. I mean, if you're acting rationally as a leader of Iran or a negotiator for Iran, you would say the United States government, and particularly Trump, they are agreement incapable. So you mentioned the Gaza ceasefire. To put a little bit more flesh on the bones, what happened was at the beginning of the second phase, Israel was supposed to withdraw from the Philadelphia corridor and complete the withdrawal within about 9 days. And before the first phase completed, Israeli officials told the press, you know what, we're not leaving the Philadelphia corridor, but we want Hamas to continue releasing the hostages. So they just rewrote the deal. They did the same thing in Lebanon. They were supposed to get out. They still have troops on Lebanese soil, and they continue attacking Lebanon, even though Hezbollah has restrained itself. Trump himself destroyed the JCPOA, the nuclear deal with Iran, even though Iran was respecting the deal. Trump pulled out the United States out of the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, claiming that Russia wasn't respecting the deal, but that's a dubious proposition. I could go on and on. The bottom line is, anybody looking objectively at the record of the US government, and particularly the Trump administration, would say we just can't trust these people. No deal is worth more than toilet paper. So we'll have to see, how the Iranians react. The problem, of course, is that we have also seen the level of barbarism that the Trump administration and the Israeli regime can engage in. So they have to weigh that against the distrust they have for any agreement they might reach with.
Yeah, and speaking of, exactly as you're noting there, when it comes to what the US and Israel are doing in Gaza. I mean, we've seen several horrific massacres carried out by Israeli forces, completely supported by the Trump administration. And now you have the Trump administration doubling down in their support of Israel, even after you had Israeli forces outright murder 15 paramedic civil defense workers and a UN staff member when the IDF opened fire on their clearly marked emergency vehicles that they were traveling in. So even in the aftermath of that, when we get the video footage, when we see just how horrible it was, we see the shallow grave, we have all of this evidence. And even Israel, I don't know that they're necessarily changing their story, but they're rewording it a little bit, right? They're saying our initial account was mistaken and we'll investigate it, quote unquote. Even then, the White House is still doubling down in their support. What is the message that that sends to the region about where the U.S. actually stands when it comes to Israel?
I think the message is very clear. Israel has been given a green light, not just by the US government, but by every major Western government to commit whatever crimes it wishes to commit. I mean, I don't know how else to interpret the behavior. This 8 days ago, the Greek prime minister went to Jerusalem and was, affectionately, chumming up to Netanyahu. We just saw that Netanyahu was invited warmly by Viktor Orban to Hungary. Right where I am here in Kalamata, for the last 10 days, we've been listening to warplanes flying overhead as Israel conducted military exercises with the US, France, Spain, Italy, Greece, and Cyprus, and several Gulf states. And I think that probably what they're doing is they're preparing for an attack on Iran. So the entire West, it's not just the US, it was also the Biden administration. Every major Western country has sent a message to Israel. You have the green light to commit whatever crimes you want with complete impunity, and we will protect you from the consequences of your criminality. So again, this is another reason why a rational actor who's invited to do a deal with Israel and the United States would say, no, I simply can't trust you. If you have the determination to attack us, well, we're going to respond in kind, but we simply can't enter into any kind of agreement with you that we can rely upon in future. We'll see what the Iranians have to say, but I really am skeptical, Rachel, that there's going to be a deal between Iran and the Trump administration. Just as I'm skeptical that Trump is going to bring the Ukraine war to an end. I don't believe that's going to happen. And, he's had 78 days to do that after telling us he was going to get it done in 24 hours. And there's no end in sight for the Ukraine war. That tells you all you need to know about where things are heading in West Asia.
Yeah, that's a really great point. And yeah, I know Trump, what he campaigned on, right? Those last ditch efforts to say, I'll bring peace to the Middle East. And it's like, he's clearly doing the opposite. But as you're laying it out there, I'm thinking, okay, we look at the West as a whole, right? We look at everything that they've been through in the last 3 years, where they did go forward with this proxy war against Russia. Obviously, it went to new heights more so than in the 8 years before. But you had the West in this position where they said, okay, we're going to try to isolate the Russian economy. We're going to put all of these sanctions on them and target them in all of these different ways. And it didn't work. In fact, for Europe, it was more harmful to them than anything. So they have that precedent, yet you still have the US in this position where now they're trying to stir up tensions with China, right? They're prepping for war with China. They're prepping for war with Iran. And I'm just going, I know that this may make the military industrial complex plenty of money, but the end result of all of these tensions is going to be the furthering of the multipolar world, exactly what we saw with Russia, where you have all these other countries going, okay, we clearly can't rely on the US. They're insane. Therefore, how do we all work with each other? Do you think that that's something that the US, that the Trump administration is actually factoring in, or do they seem to believe the propaganda that they're putting out there that, oh, we're the greatest country, so we get to just do whatever we want and target whoever we want?
Oh, look, I think a consistent theme of Donald Trump's political career and his business career before that, I actually worked and lived in New York City when Donald Trump was the swashbuckling real estate magnate. I can remember back then what he was like. He has been very consistent throughout his entire business and political career in one respect, and that is hubris. The man has an absolutely colossal, gigantic ego. he can't even admit that he's wrong about anything. For example, recently when he was challenged about his claim he was going to end the Ukraine war in 24 hours, instead of saying, yeah, okay, I was wrong, I couldn't get it done in 24 hours, he said, oh, I was just being sarcastic. This is the nature of the man. He thinks he's the best president ever, the best businessman ever, the best negotiator ever. At the same time, however, people who are supporters of the Trump administration in the economic elite, I think they're getting quite nervous, and you can see this in the stock markets. People are looking at this tariff war that he's ignited against virtually the entire world. He even imposed significant tariffs on Israel. Okay, he went after just about everybody. And that's, by the way, part of the reason why Netanyahu is in Washington, to try to get Trump to lift those tariffs. But the point here is that his natural inclination is hubris, excess, aggression. He's like the proverbial bull in the China stop, but he has very powerful supporters who are looking at the current situation and wondering if Trump is actually going to end up shooting them in the foot. So the question here is going to be, how much influence do they actually have over Donald Trump? We're about to find out.
Yeah, and when you look at, the back and forth, he doesn't seem too fond of the US allies in Europe, at least when it comes to people like Emmanuel Macron and Keir Starmer, but yet he's also kind of figuring out that he has to put up with them anyway, at least if he wants to continue on in the direction that he's currently going. Now, I also wanted to ask you about the latest coming out of Yemen too, because I know that that's another factor in this overall regional conflict. When you talk about Iran and its support for the axis of resistance, the chief, when you look at the importance of Ansar Allah in the region, that has been growing. And especially right now, as you have the Trump administration in this place, where exactly as you pointed out, Trump will not admit that these strikes are not working. Instead, he'll sit there and he'll say, oh, they're highly successful, right? Everything's going according to plan. But then you have the New York Times citing anonymous Pentagon officials saying that, yeah, we're spending hundreds of millions of dollars and we're not getting much out of it. You also have CNN saying that these attacks by the US are actively leading the Houthis to double down in their blockade of certain ships in the Red Sea, saying, quote, the Houthis are what one veteran Yemen watcher calls the honey badgers of resistance, referring to the belligerent mammal known for its fearless attitude toward predators. Bitten by a cobra, they get up minutes later and attack the snake. Interesting way to describe it there. But I mean, how do you view the situation that Ansar Allah is currently in, where, yeah, the US keeps bombing them and it has done nothing to deter them from the blockade that they have imposed in the Red Sea?
Well, a couple of days ago, a Yemeni activist who's in Yemen now as we speak, he sent me, and I'm looking at it, he sent me a chart of the destruction that the United States and the Saudis and the UAE caused to Yemen over the past 10 years. According to the data he provided to me, these are direct casualties from the military attacks on Yemen. 52,000 total casualties approximately, about 33,000 wounded, 19,000 killed. I'll just cite to you a few of the figures about the infrastructure destruction. 15 airports destroyed, 16 ports, 434 factories, 459 fuel tankers. Again, I could go on. And here they are, Rachel, in 2025, standing up to what could be the most vicious round of bombing that they've had to endure thus far. What we're talking about here is a people who I think have concluded that this is their moral and religious duty. They are going to fight to the bitter end to defend the Palestinian people. They see that others who have far more power than them in the region, regimes such as those of Saudi Arabia and Egypt, are doing nothing to assist the Palestinians in their time of dire need, and in fact are in some ways facilitating what Israel is doing. And they would prefer to die with honor than to live in shame. And that's a powerful opponent when you're confronted by somebody. I encountered this, when I went to South Lebanon during the past 18 months. I went there 5 times as Israel was bombing the bejesus out of one village after another, the south. And the people there again and again expressed the view that this was their religious duty. And the whole concept of martyrdom and giving one's life to a higher cause, something that is very foreign nowadays to Western governments, I think is really driving their response to the genocide. I just don't believe that the bombing campaign is going to bring to an end. As long as the Houthis have breath in their lungs and blood pulsing through their veins, they will resist. And the only way the Americans have any chance, any enemy of Yemen has any chance of stopping the attacks on Red Sea shipping in Israel, is to send hundreds of thousands of troops into the country. And I just don't see the West doing that. They have no stomach for the kinds of casualties that the peoples of the region have been enduring.
Yeah, it's all fun and games for the Trump administration to say, look at us bombing, and literally Trump tweeting pictures of or videos of him bombing tribal gatherings. But it's another thing when you're talking about the US getting embroiled in a full-on boots on the ground war when they're talking about Americans coming home in body bags. And, we're seeing the Trump administration, get into a number of different conflicts. It'll be interesting to see just how far they want to get into that, especially if we're talking about an all-out regional war with Iran. I know that there is certainly a lot at stake here all around, and I really appreciate you taking the time to join me today to break down all of the latest here. Dimitri Lascaris, a Canadian journalist, activist, lawyer, and host of Reason to Resist. Thank you so much for your time and insight.
Always a pleasure, Rachel. Take care.
If anything in this video resonated with you, be sure to like it, share it with your friends, leave a comment, and as always, don't forget to subscribe. And if you want to keep up with all of my work, make sure that you're subscribed to my page on Substack. That's rachelblevins.substack.com. That's where you'll find ad-free videos and new weekly episodes of my exclusive series for paid subscribers called Sanctioned. You can also check out Sanctioned over on my page on Patreon. That's patreon.com/Rachel Blevins. As always, thank y'all so much for all of your support, and I'll see you next time.